If you know radio detectives, you likely know about Paul Temple. Created by crime author Francis Durbridge and debuting in Send for Paul Temple in 1938, Paul Temple and his wife, commonly called Steve, would feature in 22 original radio productions, a series of novels, 3 feature films, a newspaper comic strip, and a television series starring Francis Matthews. Today I, Thomas Wrightson, an author and fan of the radio show, am going to rank the surviving serials. The tiers are split based upon the serial's quality of characters, writing, mystery, and level of needless repetition. So take it away, past me. So here we are with our rankings, with our 17 titles. You may be wondering why there are 2 of the same serial here. We will get to that. And we've got our rankings here. I will explain them. By Timothy, it's Paul Temple's usual catchphrase almost, and this is basically top of the tree. Any beginner could listen to this and know whether they actually like the series, but it also works as a standalone. It's basic, and it's also got good characters and a good, well-written mystery. The sort of intuition is, yes, it's still very good. I rank it among some of them I may actually really like that I bump down because they're maybe not the best for beginners, or the best to show what the series is like. Next down, Yes, Mr. T, is still, they are good, but it's maybe not the thing. There may be pacing issues, there may be writing issues, the mystery may not be very compelling, but it's still decent. And then Oh Paul, ellipses, is, yes, they're still good, but maybe not something that, I don't think they represent the series that well, and whether due to previous issues being worse. And then of course the bottom tier, You Are the Limit, which is just only listen to these if you are curious or you are a big fan of the series. Let's put it that way. So let's start off with a 1940 remake, the only version we have surviving, of Send for Paul Temple, the very first Paul Temple serial in which the eponymous criminologist and author pits his wits against the master jewel thief, the Knave of Diamonds. This is the very first Paul Temple serial, and it shows. There are things about it that are a bit clunky. It's very much of its time. The formula hasn't been laid down properly, and if you listen to this and then listen to all of the others that have been preserved, you will likely get a bit of dissonance with what's going on, because there's quite a few tropes that got established later on that aren't present in this. And also, this is the serial where Paul Temple and his wife Steve first meet. They're not married yet, so a little bit of it is about their not very well written courtship. So I mean, I want to put it in Yes, Mr. T, but for the sake of fairness, I think we need to put this in Oh Paul, because I think this is something that is not quite You Are the Limit, but definitely not the best. Second is the earliest surviving complete Paul Temple serial, Paul Temple Intervenes, in which Paul Temple pits his wits against a mysterious blackmailer and murderer known as the Marquis. This is from 1942, and again, it shows its age. It was written for a small time slot. It's got some pretty poor stuff in regards to Steve. She's a bit of a wet blanket in this serial. But it does feature a very good performance by Carl Bernard as Paul Temple. And Bernadette Hodgson as Steve is good, even though her character is, as I said, a bit of a damp squib. The main thing I think that will throw people off is it's dated. It has quite a few of the established hallmarks by this point, but it's maybe not something for first timers to dive into. So for those issues, it can't go in the top 2 tiers, but it is still a very good mystery, so it goes in Yes, Mr. T. Next one is the 1950 serial Paul Temple and the Vandyke Affair, with Kim Peacock and Marjorie Westbury, who will be Steve throughout the entirety of the rest of the original run. And the 1950s production with Kim Peacock is one of the earliest surviving complete ones, the only surviving Kim Peacock serial, and I think is a wonderful place to jump in, because it's got a lot of the tropes that have been established by this point, but it's also very much more its own thing. And oh boy, it's a great mystery. I forgot to introduce it. It's about Paul Temple investigating the disappearance of a young child and its relation to the mysterious Mr. Vandyke. It's a nice mystery. It's very well written, and the original production has the later Paul Temple actor Peter Cook as one of the characters, and features Roger Delgado as another one of the characters. So for all those reasons, great characterization, also great bits for Steve in this. This goes all the way up in by Timothy. However, this serial was remade for Peter Cook's tenure, and I don't know why, but it's rather inferior. When you've listened to the original Kim Peacock one, for all its sound quality issues, because it is an archive recording, I mean, you can't listen to the remake and not think it's a little bit inferior. So I'm afraid that kind of goes down here. Sort of, this is the remake, this is the original. Find the original, listen to it. It is great. Okay, next up is the very first Peter Cook mystery, Paul Temple and the Gilbert Case, in which Paul Temple investigates the murder of a woman, Brenda Sterling, while the man who apparently killed her, Howard Gilbert, is already on death row and awaiting, the death row equivalent rather, and awaiting execution. This is again a prime example of Paul Temple, and very much like the Vandyke Affair, it has several established tropes, but it's also got some twists of its own, and it has a very well written script and a great plot twist at the end. Easily goes up here. Excuse me. Next is Paul Temple and the Lawrence Affair, where Paul Temple gets inextricably pulled into a mystery while he's in the village of Downborough writing a novel, and is led into the disappearance of the daughter of the head of MI5, and is given the address of a mysterious Mr. Lawrence. This is very well written, but maybe not for everybody, because it can be a little bit all over the place, because the mystery's a bit rambling. I really enjoy it, but looking at it from an outside perspective might not be the best. So I think this is the debut entry into the second tier sort of intuition. Next up is Paul Temple and the Spencer Affair, where Paul Temple investigates, again, a murder and gets involved in the activities of a mysterious fence. I forget whether it was a fence or a thief. Actually, it's a smuggler, a mysterious smuggler known only as Spencer. I don't particularly like this one, but I'm trying not to dock points based solely on my personal preference, because otherwise I would have put Paul Temple Intervenes higher than Yes Mr. T tier. Spencer Affair is a little bit plodding, and it's maybe not got the best characterization. It feels rather weird and uneven in places. I think it's still a good mystery, but not the best. So I think this again goes in Yes Mr. T. Paul Temple and the Conrad Case features Paul Temple again investigating the disappearance of a woman from a Swiss finishing school and a mysterious, unknown until this point, criminal. This is a very interesting story, and I think this goes in one of the higher tiers because it may not be conventional, but it's extremely well written, and the characterization of some of the things is just on point. It feels more like a more traditional suspenseful murder mystery than what you might expect from a Paul Temple. And I know that's sort of selling the Paul Temple thing a bit short, but you know, it's one of those things. So this goes in sort of intuition. Next up is Paul Temple and the Margo Mystery, where Paul Temple ends up involved in the investigation of the murder of a industrialist's wife, not wife, I do apologise, industrialist daughter, and the activities of the Fence, someone who is indirectly responsible for a new crime wave. I personally like it, but I also think it may not be one of the strongest mysteries there is. It has a compelling villain, but there's also, okay, this is one of those ones where I think it has to go somewhere in the middle. So, sort of, no, will it let me put it in the middle? Yes, it will. Oh no, it won't. Oh, it won't let me put it in the middle. Okay, put that back down there. So, I need to make a final decision on this. I think this goes here, but there's also a bit of a question mark because it suffers from, I think, from a few problems surrounding some of the stuff down here. Right, moving on. Paul Temple and the Sullivan Mystery, investigating the murder in Oxford of a Mr. Richard Ferguson, and in relation to a mysterious postcard that says, "Having a wonderful time, regards, Jonathan." I enjoy this serial, but it's one of the weaker ones because it feels formulaic. This is a remake of a Kim Peacock serial, and as you'll find from a lot of the later remake ones from the 2000s, the writer Francis Durbridge was maybe running out of some ideas, because you can find examples of him recycling scenes and character tropes more than he does in some of the later ones. So I think this, as much as I like it, goes in Paul tier. Next, Paul Temple and the Geneva Mystery, where Paul Temple is asked to look into the death of book publisher Carl Milbourne, and because his wife firmly believes that he is not dead. And this is a very intriguing mystery. I really like it. It's very tightly written. It's actually the shortest serial out of the ones that have survived, and I really enjoy it. But it's also fairly non-standard in structure. So I think this may be something that does for someone who likes an outlier in the whole how things put together. So I'm going to put this in Yes, Mr. T tier. So far we're getting a relatively even split between things. Right, the next one, Paul Temple and the Alex Affair. I'm going to be straight. I do not like this serial. This is a remake, essentially, of the second Paul Temple serial, I think, Paul Temple and the Front Page Man. And it is such a grind. It just feels like it feels like something that was cobbled together in a hurry rather than anything more involved and interesting. So I'm afraid, and I think this could put people off because there's some of the plot twists in here that feel a bit contrived. So I think, I'm sorry, I mean, some people may really like the Alex Affair, but right, moving on. This is the first of the remakes that happened, Paul Temple and the Sullivan Mystery. Paul Temple and Steve go on a trip to Egypt to research a novel and end up in a strange mystery involving a certain Mr. Sullivan and his pair of perfectly ordinary horn-rimmed spectacles. It sounds weird. It's very good. This is the serial that got me into Paul Temple. This was my Paul Temple gateway drug, if you want to use that term. This is quite good. I mean, there are some elements of it that you maybe that suffer from things that some of the later remakes have very strongly as a problem, which is, you know, some repetition of things, and the performance sounds a little artificial in places. But I think this, just because it's actually a very great way to get into it, even though, and it has some hallmarks of the Paul Temple formula without being formulaic. So I think this goes in S tier, in by Timothy tier. Next is Paul Temple and Madison Mystery. The death of an American millionaire on a cruise across from between America and London leads Temple into an investigation revolving around a antique penny and a mysterious Mr. Madison. Again, sounds weird. It's actually it's quite an engaging story. But I don't think it's one of his better ones overall. It's better than some of the others. So I think in all fairness, I'm going to put this in Yes, Mr. T tier, because some of the character writing is a bit iffy and some of the things are not quite that great, but it does have some great moments for Steve, and there's a real central mystery there. There's also some weird hopping around, and some of the stuff just doesn't get explained, which is why I'm bumping it down from sort of intuition tier. Right, Paul Temple and Steve, where Paul Temple and Steve, go figure, confront the gang racketeer Dr. Belasco as he attempts to set up shop in Britain. This serial suffers very badly from repetition and needless exposition, and it really feels very weak in terms of its plot development and mystery. I mean, it hardly feels like a mystery at all at times. It just feels so rough. So I think if anyone heard this as their first Paul Temple, they might get put off the entire series because of this. So unfortunately, that goes there. Even though Steve just comes up absolute trumps at the end, I'm afraid that doesn't quite excuse it. Paul Temple and Steve has Paul Temple. Oh, no, that's not Paul Temple. I do apologise. I'm getting a bit tired if you can't hear. A Case for Paul Temple has Paul Temple asked to investigate the activities of the notorious drug runner Valentine. They're called Valentine. Tired. The first time I've done this kind of ranking thing, so you'll have to forgive my slight iffiness. This suffers from many of the same problems as Paul Temple and Steve, but not quite as severely, and it has a more consistent mystery, an excellent twist ending, and just, generally a bit more stuff. So this gets a couple of bumps up from Paul tier. Now, which tier should it be on? I still think it's maybe not general enough for people to get fully into, so it will live in Paul tier. And finally, the longest of the Paul Temple serials at 10 episodes, Paul Temple and the Gregory Affair, where Paul Temple is face to face against the mysterious Mr. Gregory, a kidnapper and blackmailer. I enjoyed this more than I thought I would, because it's an interesting slow burn story. Yes, again, there's some repetition in here, and I think the funny thing is you get that repetition in the Kim Peacock production of Vandyke Affair, but the speed and diction mean that you don't notice it as much. I think the slower pace that a lot of people talk nowadays when they're reading or doing things like that mean that you notice this kind of thing more. So, Gregory Affair, quite good characters, passable, there's more than passable, just general plot flow, interesting sort of thing. There are some interesting twists that mean you can have problems actually guessing who's done it, so I think this goes in sort of intuition. And there is my ranking. We had a very even split between them. There are some of them when I thought about it, I thought, I don't think it should go in so-and-so poll. I thought sort of intuition would sort of be going whoop, and Paul would be zoop, and that would be and I didn't think it would be quite this well balanced, but yeah, this is gonna be great. Really pleased with this. And there we are, 17 titles ranked. If you want to dip into the series, I hope this gives you some guide to which you should try first to get a feeling for it, or dip into them in whatever order you like. Take care of yourself, and remember to put your feet on the mantelpiece and, as Sam Dodsworth would have it, think of nothing more important than the temperature of the— No, wait, Steve!